Two sets of high-stakes diplomatic negotiations taking place in Geneva, Switzerland today. Talks to end the war in Ukraine being held just a week before the 4th anniversary of Vladimir Putin's full-scale war. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner will take part in those discussions, which come as Russia continues to launch missiles and drones into Ukrainian cities during the coldest months of winter, hitting civilian targets. Witkoff and Kushner also will take part in indirect talks with Iran today. Iran has sent its foreign minister to negotiate there. This comes as the United States has built up a heavy military presence in the Middle East to apply pressure to Iran. Last night aboard Air Force One, President Trump said he still believes Iran wants to make a deal.
So I'll be involved in those talks indirectly, and they'll be very important, and we'll see what can happen. I mean, it's been typically Iran's a very tough negotiator. They're good negotiators, or bad negotiators. I would say they're bad negotiators because we could have had a deal instead of sending the B-2s in to knock out their nuclear potential, and we had to send the B-2s. I hope they're going to be more reasonable. They want to make a deal.
Have you been told that a deal is next to impossible?
No, I think they want to make a deal. I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal. They want to make a deal.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is praising Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban after a high-profile meeting in Budapest. Rubio met yesterday with Orban, highlighting what he called the close personal ties between Orban and President Trump, signaling strong White House backing ahead of Hungary's closely contested April elections.
I can say to you with confidence that President Trump is deeply committed to your success, because your success is our success. Because this relationship we have here in Central Europe through you is so essential and vital for our national interests in the years to come. That, if you face financial struggles, if you face things that are impediments to growth, if you face things that threaten the stability of your country, I know that President Trump will be very interested because of your relationship with him and because of this importance to this country, to us, to finding ways to provide assistance if that moment ever were to arise.
Joe, your thoughts here, especially with the need to talk about Ukraine and what is going on there, but I think important to take a beat and put a frame around what just happened and what Marco Rubio was. Yeah.
Why do we do that? Because let me just say, for those of us who are conservative with a small c, for those of us who love the West, and love freedom and have, remember when West Germany was at the edge of freedom and now it's moved to Ukraine. It's important to hear what he said. And for those of us who, again, traditionally believe in freedom and the importance of moving freedom as far east as we can move it, it's important to understand that what Marco Rubio said, he knows what he said is a lie. What is best for Hungary is worse for the United States. Hungary has Orban at its head. He is a pro-Putin lackey. Everything he does in the EU is to hurt Ukraine and to help Putin. He stands alone, or until recently stood alone, as being the only pro-Putin lackey in Europe. And this is a guy that throughout the post-communist constitution in 2012, he has destroyed the independence of the courts. He has prosecutors, tell me if this sounds familiar, who spend their days going after political enemies. He has committed war, declared war against universities and research centers and taken away their independence. He has taken away the independence of the press. He has brought phony charges against people who owned, had press, had owned television stations and newspapers, so brought charges against them and ran them out of the business. He has bugged the phones of reporters, and he's rigged elections. He rigged he rigged elections in such a way that his party would always win super majorities. This is the most autocratic country in Central and Western Europe, and what is good for Orban is bad for America, is bad for freedom, is bad for Ukraine, and is only good for Vladimir Putin. And I suppose Donald Trump, it is screwed up that any American president would want anything to do with that autocratic thug. And for Marco Rubio, a guy caddy for Marco Rubio, a guy who is this, anti-communist hawk and against autocracy and supporting freedom and liberty, for him to be embracing Orban and saying those things about Orban, which he does not believe, it is a new low.
Yeah, I was listening to that speech that he gave in Hungary, and I felt like you that it came off as somebody who was desperately trying to say something they believed in, but it was pretty obvious that they didn't. I mean, there is Marco Rubio. He's sort of straddling this world where he's looking to 2028 thinking, I have to shore up the MAGA vote. I can't have them abandon me. I have to make sure that Donald Trump is happy, although apparently he wasn't with the speech that he gave in Berlin, and make sure the Europeans are also happy, because that's actually what I believe. I still do believe in this world order where America leads, and he tried to kind of reconcile Europeans and have them in a bit better position with America at the Berlin Security Conference, at the Munich Security Conference. But then he goes on, and where does he go and visit? The two countries that are the most Russia-aligned in all of Europe. He goes to Slovakia and he goes to Hungary. And maybe there was a charitable reason. He could have gone to those two countries and said, we really don't like you buying Russian oil. Those are the two countries in the European Union that buy the most Russian oil. You're funding the Russian war machine. Please stop. But actually, he stands up and he gives a little bit of a speech saying, we will help you. And if you win the election, then we'll have even more help for Hungary. It sounded a little bit like they did in Argentina. And he didn't seem to have taken a tough line with Hungary.
Let's bring into the conversation the editor-in-chief of The Economist, Zanny Mitton-Bedos, who was at the Munich Security Conference last week. Zanny, great to have you at the table with us. This comes also in the context of Marco Rubio in Munich giving a speech where he effectively lectured American allies about civilizational erasure, about how they're allowing their civilizations to be wiped out, their history to be wiped out by immigration. It comes just a few weeks after Davos, when President Trump went even further, sort of insulting at every turn our allies, and then going to Hungary and just being completely conciliatory and saying, we are arm in arm, we stand shoulder to shoulder with you. A very notable difference in tone in those addresses.
Absolutely. I was in the room in Munich when Secretary Rubio gave his talk. And actually, it felt like less of a lecture, at least compared to the same speech given last year by Vice President J.D. Vance, which was very much a lecture which completely shocked Europe. This time, it was on Valentine's Day. Secretary Rubio actually said a lot of words that there was a standing ovation at the end. Words like, he mentioned that the Europeans and the Americans had bled and died side by side from Kabyang to Kandahar. He talked about Dante and the heritage of everything that America owed to Europe. But the underlying tones were very much the kind of MAGA tones, as you say, of civilizational erasure that would come from mass migration. He talked about obsession with climate cult, all of the kind of talking points of the MAGA. And in the room at the time and afterwards, people were saying, is this just the same MAGA President Trump agenda with a nicer veneer, a kind of Valentine's Day veneer, or is it something different? And I think what we've learned from his trip to Budapest is that it absolutely was just the same MAGA, but just with a slightly more polite framing in Munich. And so I think in Europe now, people are very, very clear. The US cannot be trusted. Europe needs to de-risk from the US. And there's a bit of a division amongst European leaders about how dramatically that change has to be, because it's difficult for Europe, right? Europe really needs the US in NATO and all kinds of things. And so there are still European leaders who listen to the Marco Rubio in Munich and think, actually, the US is still with us. This is all going to be okay. But But there are others who say, essentially, it's over. We need to assume that we're on our own.
And Europe needs the U.S. as the strong leader / beacon of the free world, not the direction it's going in now. And the question is, are some banking on history holding?
I think that's over. I think in Europe, there's a very strong sense that I got from the days in Munich and indeed before in Davos. All this idea of what people call the global world order, the US-led over, it is over. The West, I think, is over as a concept, in the sense that there are significant differences now between what the United States administration wants and what many people in Europe want. And it is important to be realistic about that. There are areas that we agree on, but the idea that the US is pushing for the same agenda as Europe, think only about, look at Ukraine. As you say, Secretary Rubio is supporting the man who is making it most difficult in Europe to support Ukraine.
Frank Ford, jump in.
Yeah, Zanny, I'm struck by the finality of the way that Europeans seem to be talking about this de-risking or this decoupling with the United States. But what practically does it mean for American foreign policy? And Europeans can talk this sort of way, but in terms of the way that we operate in the world, what are the practical implications?
So in the short term, I think the practical implications depend on whether the Europeans take this as the moment where they are actually at last going to do all the things that everyone needs they need to do. Massively increase defense spending, shake up their regulations so their economy grows faster, all of the kind of to-do list that has been lectured at Europe for a long time, and rightly so. If they use this moment to do that, then I think Europe becomes more powerful in its own right and is able, over time, to be more de-risked and more independent from the United States. It's going to take a long time. I think let's be realistic about this. So it's not like, overnight Europe is not going to be incredibly dependent on the US. The transatlantic relationship really matters, but rather like a kind of a family that has had some terrible behavior or a relationship that's had some terrible behavior. This has now ruptured something. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, talked about a rupture. I think something has ripped, and there is a massive loss of trust. And in Europe now, there are more and more people saying, we cannot trust the Americans any longer, and that's a fundamental shift.